object is a real-time entity, whereas class is a collection of related objects which having same characteristics and behavior. Functionalities where it may be incoming call, outgoing call, WhatsApp, Bluetooth, messengers, everything, all these can be called as functionalities. That is operations here. When you want to write the statements outside the class, then we are using this scope resolution operator. As well as this helps to identify that particular function belongs to which class also. Welcome back to one and all. Myself, Vasanta, lecturer in Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysore. Today, we are going to start with the revision class on Classes and Object chapter. Whereas, from this chapter, you will get 2 questions from this chapter. In part A, 1 question for 1 marks, and in part D, 1 question for 5 marks. Total weightage of this chapter is 6 marks. 2 questions, 6 marks. 1 question on part A and another question on part D for 5 marks. Whereas on this chapter, you will study regarding what do you mean by class definition and declaration, how to create a class, how to declare, how to define the class. Then what do you mean by access specifier, what are the main advantages of access specifier, outside class definition, with that inside class definition, then object of a class. These are the major concepts on this chapter you will study. Whereas already I told you 1 marks 1 question as well as 5 marks 1 question. For 1 marks you may get the question, what is class? Whereas class is a collection of related objects which having same characteristics and behavior. For example, if I am going to take one mobile, here this is a mobile. This mobile have datas as well as functions. This is mobile 1. I am going to take one more mobile, mobile 2. Here also we have data as well as functions. Whereas data is nothing but contacts, function is nothing but operations like incoming call, outgoing call, WhatsApp, messengers, all those can be called as functionalities. Whereas when they come on class, it is a collection of grouping of objects. This is one object, this is one object. Whereas a way of grouping objects having similar characteristics are called as class here. Whereas object is a real-time entity, whereas class is a collection of related objects which having same characteristics and behavior. Then next, what is data members? Whereas already I told you in the mobile we have the contacts. That contacts can be called as data members and the functionalities can be called as member functions. Whereas data is nothing but the variables which we are using in the program, whereas function is nothing but set of operations that we can able to perform on that. Whereas here members which describes the characteristics of a class or variables declared inside a class are called as data members. Whereas data members is nothing but a variables which we are using in the program, or it describes the characteristics of that variables here. Then next, what is member function? Already I told you it describes the operations. Whether in the mobile, the contacts that can be called as variables, that is nothing but data members, and the functionalities where it may be incoming call, outgoing call, WhatsApp, Bluetooth, messengers, everything, all these can be called as functionalities, that is nothing but operations here. When they come on member function, the functions which describes the operations that can perform within the data members of a class or functions declared inside a class are called as member function. Or we can say it's a set of operation also. Next you have what is the significance of using access specifier. That is why access specifiers are used. We can get the questions like this way. Whereas access specifier will going to give the scope of the data, whether the data can be accessed or not. If it is, we can able to access, then who can able to access the data? whether it's a private, public or protected. If it is protected, then derived function can also able to access. If it is private, only friend function and member function can able to access. Whereas the access specifier we're going to give the controls the movement of the data, or it will going to control the scope of the data. Whereas access specifier helps in controlling the access of data members, or we can say that defines the scope of the data. When they come on access specifiers, three types. One is private, and one more is public, and one more is protected. There are three types: private, public and protected. Whereas in private access specifier, only data members and friend function can able to access. If it is public, then any function can able to access. If it is protected, then data members plus friend function plus derived function of that class can able to access here. This is regarding access specifiers. Then what is the significance of scope resolution operator? Whereas scope resolution operator is used to define the member function outside the class, or it will say that particular function belongs to which class. When you want to write the statements outside the class, then we are using this scope resolution operator. As well as this helps to identify that particular function belongs to which class also. Whereas scope resolution operator is used to define the member function outside the class. This is the operator, scope resolution operator we are using. Next, for 5 marks, you may get the questions like, what do you mean by class definition and declaration? Explain inside class definition, explain outside class definition, or explain access specifier. Or you may expect how to create object of a class, then how exactly it will work, right? The syntax of that. Like that, this is the major 5 questions you may expect from this chapter. Whereas here, explain the class definition and declaration with syntax and example. When they come on this, first thing you have to mention what do you mean by class. Then you have to write the syntax. Under syntax, which are the members, which are the data, which are the variables you will get, explain that. And in the question, if they ask explain with example, then if you write the block, that is enough. If they ask explain with an example program, then compulsory you have to write the program. Whereas already I told you, a class definition is a process of naming a class. What's the class? That naming of a class, data, variables and interface operations of the class. And here the keyword class is used to define a class. Whereas in this syntax, first we have class is the keyword. Then next we have to write the class name. For example, here I want to write the class regarding, for example, I want to find sum of 2 numbers. Then class is the keyword. Then afterwards, next you have to write the class name. Here, for example, I want to perform addition of 2 numbers. Then class name, for example, I am to give it as sum. Then open the flower bracket. In this, we have 3 access specifier. Where access specifier will going to give the scope of the data, where it may be private, public or protected, any 3 types. Whereas if we are not mentioned the access specifier, then default it will take it as private access specifier. Whichever you want you can write. For example, here I will take private, whereas here int a comma b comma c. Then next here private is the access specifier, here we are given. After that you have to write the colon. Then here we have data members. Data members is nothing but the variables. Whereas in this example, which are the variables we are using? A, B, C. These are the variables. Then member functions. Whereas member function is nothing but set of operations that we can able to perform on that. Whereas here, for example, in public access specifier, I will write public void get data is the function. Then one more I will take void display function. Only 2 function here I am taking, one get data and one more is display function. Whereas we have 3 access specifier, private, protected and public. Then in private also we have data members as well as member function. In Next one, in protected also we have data members as well as member function. In public also we have data members as well as member function. Write down whichever access specifier you have, then write down the data members and member function. Then afterwards close the class here, whichever we opened, that here we have to close the flower bracket. To close the class, after writing flower bracket, compulsory you have to put semicolon. This is the opening of the class and this is the closing of the class. Whereas for this question, you have to explain class is the keyword, class name is the user defined name, access specifier, we are going to give scope of the data, 3 access specifier, private, public and protected. In all the 3 we have data as well as function. Data is nothing but the variables, function is nothing but the operations that we can able to perform. All the things you have to explain. Next, when you come on write an example program, first write down the header file, whichever header file you required. Whereas here I used iostream.h. This is the supporting header file for scene as well as cout. Then conio.h. This is a supporting header file for clear screen as well as getCS function. Then here we are creating a class. The class name we are given as sum. Here we are open the class and here we are closing that class. Whereas in private section I are declaring 3 variables A, B, C. Then in public section void get data is a function. Whereas inside this function we have enter the value of A and B value. Then we will input these 2 values. Whereas next for calculation, void compute function we are taking. Here we are doing the calculation, that is C equals A plus B. Then here we are closing this function. Next we have void display. We are displaying the value. The result is present on C. That's why cout sum equals display C. This is the display function. That means in this program we have 3 functions and here we are written a statement inside the class itself. Then here void main. We are creating an object here. The class name we are given as sum, then yes we are written. Whereas yes is the object of a class here. Then yes dot get data when you write, then this part automatically it will execute. Get data function will execute. When we write s dot compute function, then compute function automatically it will execute. Then when we write s dot display, then display function it automatically execute. Then get ch, then here we are closing the main program. This is a simple program to explain class definition and declaration. And the same example program you can write for inside class definition also. Because here we have written all the statement inside the class only. Now is it clear? Next, we will move on to the next question, that is explain different types of access specifier in the class. When they come on access specifier, already I told you it's going to give scope of the data. While writing the syntax class name we will write. Then afterwards here if you have private access specifier, write down here private, then colon data members, then member functions. Then here we have to close the class. It means that here the access specifier in this case we are given as private, whereas access specifier defines the scope of data members and member functions. It mainly gives the scope of the data as well as function. There are 3 access specifier private. Whereas if I am going to declare it as a private here, then here whatever data as well as functions we have, this can be accessed by only by member function as well as friend function. Private access specifier is used to access data members only by member functions. And in friend function also we can able to access this. Member declared under private are accessible only within the class here. Private access specifier is a default access specifier. Whereas in the example here just we have written private then int ABC. Whereas in the example, for example, class add, on this here in private section we are declaring the variable, for example int A, B, C. Then we are closing this class. Whereas this is the syntax and here we can write the example regarding private. Otherwise if you write private int ABC, that is also correct. Then in public access specifier, just here whatever thing here just replace this by public. Here also just replace this by public. then it will work. This is nothing but here in public access specifier is used to access data members by any function inside or outside the class. Whereas here void get data, everything, compute function, display function, anything you can write. For example, class, here add is the class name. On this I will write public, then afterwards here int ABC, whatever you want you can write, then here you have to close the function. Now is it clear? Next one more we have protected. Whereas the members which are declared as protected can access it only by the member functions, friend functions. Member function can be able to access friend function of the class and member functions derived from this class. That means child class can also access this data. The members cannot be accessed outside the class here. Then here example class, then sum is the class name. Here you have to write protected. Then here you have data members, for example int ABC. Then here you have to close the class. Like this we can able to close the protected. Now is it clear? When you come on access specifier, private, public and protected, all the three you have to explain with syntax and example. The next question like explain outside class definition. Outside class definition is nothing but we are defining the statement outside the class here. Statements of the class are written, functions of the class are written outside the class. Here compulsory we need scope resolution operator. The scope resolution operator helps to define the member function outside the class here. When I come on outside class definition, a member function declared within the class must define separately outside the class. We have to write all the statement outside the class only. The definition of a function is similar to normal function, but a member function has an identity label in the header and scope resolution operator is used to define the member functions outside the class. While writing the syntax, first you have to write the return type, then next class name. So this is the scope resolution operator, member function. Then inside the bracket you have to write the arguments. Then here inside the flower bracket you have to write the functions. But here don't put any semicolon here because now we are writing the statement outside the class. When you come on example program, there for example first we are including iostream.h. This is a supporting header file for scene as well as cout function. Then conio.h for clear screen as well as getCS function. Then the class name here we are given as sum. Then in this private section we are declaring the variable ABC. These are the variables we required. Then in public section void get data for input purpose, compute for calculation purpose and display function. Then here whichever class we opened, that here we are closing. That means we are not written the statement get, compute as well as display inside the class, whereas now after closing the class, outside the class we are writing. Whereas first we'll start with the return type void. If you observe here whichever return type we have, the same return type you have to consider. Void, then class name is sum, scope resolution operator, then get data function. Here we'll write the statement, enter the value of A and B, then we'll input the value A and B. Then here we are closing this function. Next, for compute function, void sum, then compute function. Here we are using scope resolution operator. Whereas scope resolution operator helps to define the member function outside the class as well as this helps to define that particular function belongs to which class also. Then here we are doing the calculation, that is C equals A plus B. Then one more function we have display function, that will display the value. Then finally in the main program void main, there we are creating an object. Then we'll call the function s.getData, then getData part will execute, s.compute, then compute part will execute, s.display, then display function will execute, getCH, then here whichever main program we opened, that we are closing here. Now is it clear? This is a program to explain outside the class definition. The same program you can write by using inside class as well as outside class definition also. Next, we'll move on to the next question. Explain how objects of a class can be defined with a suitable example. That means in the program, once if I created a class, how much objects you want, that many objects we can able to create. With the help of object only, we can able to call the functions. Whereas here when we come on class definition, there we are defining what is the class name, which are the data members, which are the member function, everything we can able to define there. Whereas when a class is defined, then it is specifies the type of object it can stored. Once the class is defined, then object is created from that class. Once if I'm going to create a class, from that how many objects you want, you can create. The object of a class are declared within the same manner like other variable declaration. Whether here if you observe the syntax, on this syntax, class name, object 1, comma, object 2, comma, object 3, then finally semicolon you have to write. If you have multiple object, all the objects are separated by comma operator. Then if you have only one object, then class name, object name, then directly you have to put semicolon. Whereas in the example, same program I am taking sum of two numbers, first header files, then class name sum. Under this, we have data as well as function. Then we are writing the statement inside the class itself here. Then here this is a compute function and this is a display function. Then finally here we are closing the class. Then in the main program we are writing here this is the object creation, that is class name sum then object. Whereas whichever name you want for object, that name you can able to give here. Then s.getData, s.compute, s.display, then close the main program. Whereas here, object of a class means once a class is defined, multiple objects we can able to create from that class. Now is it clear? Then on this class, you come to know what do you mean by class definition and declaration, how to write the syntax for class definition and declaration, then what do you mean by inside class definition as well as outside class definition. Then with that, you have studied regarding access specifier. Whereas when you come on access specifier, there you will study regarding what do you mean by private access specifier, public access specifier, as well as protected access specifier. Then how exactly all these three access specifier will work. Then how to create an object. If I want to create an object, then which support we require, that is class name we are required. And for object, any name you can give, whichever name you want to give. And with that, in the same class, we can able to create multiple objects also. Regarding that, you have studied. In the next class, we will meet you once again with a new chapter. Thank you for all of you.